Chapter 1. The Inheritance. Jason Carter had always been a man who shied away from surprises, a person whose life was defined by routine. He worked as a mid-level manager at a small tech company, spending his days buried in spreadsheets and emails, his nights often spent at home on the couch, watching reruns of old shows while eating frozen pizza. His life wasn't exciting, but it was stable, predictable. He liked it that way. He'd never had much of a family, not that it bothered him. His parents had passed away when he was young, and most of his relatives, aside from a few distant cousins, had remained strangers. The only family member who had ever stood out to him was his uncle Marcus, a peculiar man who had never seemed to fit into the usual mold of society. Jason's memories of his uncle were scattered and fragmented, but there was one thing that had always stood out. Marcus had been eccentric in ways that even Jason's most imaginative moments couldn't quite explain. Marcus had never married, never had children, and had always lived alone in a small, dilapidated building on the outskirts of town. It wasn't that Jason had any particular fondness for his uncle. He hadn't seen him in years, not since Jason was a teenager. But he had remembered Marcus as being something of an oddball, the type of person who had an endless array of strange hobbies and obsessions. Jason's memories of the man were filled with images of the old shop that Marcus had run, the Antique Emporium, a dusty little place crammed with everything from old furniture to bizarre trinkets that seemed to defy explanation. Some of the items in the shop had looked like they belonged in a museum, while others seemed downright out of place. There were stories Jason had heard as a child about how his uncle would collect the strangest things from all corners of the world, even from places that sounded too exotic to be real. But that was about all he knew. Jason had never really asked too many questions about it. After all, what did a quiet tech worker need with an eccentric uncle who was obsessed with antiques and oddities? That was, until the letter arrived. It came on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind of day that seemed to hold no promise of excitement. Jason had been sipping his coffee, staring absent-mindedly at the pile of work that awaited him, when the letter arrived at his apartment. The envelope was thick, heavier than usual, and it was addressed in a way that caught his attention. To Jason Carter, heir to the estate of Marcus F. Carter. At first, Jason thought it was some kind of mistake. There were no living relatives left for him to inherit anything from, and he hadn't heard from Uncle Marcus in over a decade. Marcus had lived his life in his own peculiar way, keeping to himself, and as far as Jason knew, he had never been in contact with anyone about his estate. He set the letter down for a moment, unsure of what to make of it, but curiosity soon won out. He tore it open and unfolded the contents, skimming over the legal jargon until his eyes landed on the words that made his heart skip a beat. Dear Mr. Carter, we regret to inform you of the passing of your uncle, Marcus F. Carter, at the age of 72. We hereby notify you that, as per his will, you have been named the sole heir to his estate, including all properties, assets, and possessions. The will and estate documents are enclosed for your review. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he read the letter again, his mind struggling to absorb the reality of it all. Marcus, the uncle he barely knew, the man who had always lived in the shadows of Jason's life, had left everything to him. The letter went on to explain that his uncle had run an antique shop, a business that was now Jason's responsibility, and that there were specific instructions regarding the estate, including a request for Jason to visit the property in person to discuss the details. Jason's thoughts raced. What was this all about? Why had Marcus left him all of this? And why now, after all these years of silence? The letter didn't say much more, but it was clear that there was something more at play here. The words about the inheritance and the estate were formal and dry, but something about them felt off, like there was more to the story than just a simple bequest. The idea of inheriting an antique shop seemed strange enough on its own, but what really caught Jason's attention was the mention of a hidden room behind his uncle's office, a space that had never been open to the public or to any of the people who worked with Marcus over the years. Jason felt an inexplicable pull to find out more, to uncover whatever secrets his uncle had left behind. After taking a few days to sort through his thoughts and confirm the legitimacy of the letter, Jason decided to make the trip. There was no use in putting it off. His uncle's estate had been handed to him, and he had a responsibility to at least see what it all entailed. The thought of dealing with antiques didn't excite him, but the mystery surrounding the hidden room intrigued him. So, Jason packed a small bag and boarded a flight to the small town where Marcus had lived and worked, far from the bustling metropolis of the city he called home. The town was quiet, nestled between rolling hills, its charm fading with each passing year. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the oddities of the past were still alive in the cracks of old buildings and forgotten streets. As Jason walked to the antique emporium, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The shop looked exactly as he remembered it from his childhood: dusty windows, creaky door, and a sign that had seen better days. It felt like walking into the past, like stepping into another world, and Jason couldn't shake the feeling that the shop had been frozen in time, waiting for him to arrive. The door creaked open as Jason stepped inside, the air thick with the smell of old wood, mothballs, and something else, something faintly metallic, as though the place itself had been touched by something otherworldly. The shelves were lined with objects from every corner of the globe, each piece more curious than the last. There were ancient artifacts, strange trinkets, and curious machines that Jason couldn't identify. It was a museum, a store, and a time capsule all in one. As he wandered through the aisles, Jason couldn't help but feel like he was walking through a dream, each step carrying him deeper into a past he had never truly known. The atmosphere was thick with mystery, and he couldn't escape the nagging sense that he was being drawn towards something he wasn't prepared for. He made his way to the back of the shop, where his uncle's old office had been. The door creaked open, revealing a room just as he remembered it. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with dusty tomes and papers that were too old to touch. Behind the desk, there was a chair that looked like it hadn't been used in years, and in the corner, a stack of boxes that appeared to be filled with more of the same strange objects that littered the shop. But as Jason approached the desk, he noticed something strange: a faint, almost imperceptible gleam of light coming from the corner of the room, where a large painting hung on the wall. Curious, he stepped closer, his eyes scanning the edges of the frame. As he reached out to touch it, the painting shifted slightly, revealing a hidden latch behind it. Jason's pulse quickened as he reached for the latch, pulling it open to reveal a narrow door leading down into darkness. The air in the small space was cooler, heavier, as if the room beyond had been sealed off for ages. Without thinking, Jason took a deep breath and stepped forward, the door creaking closed behind him. Jason Carter's fingers trembled as they brushed the edges of the envelope. His mind swirled with disbelief, but there was also a strange anticipation building inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. The letter he had received, out of nowhere, from the law firm regarding his late Uncle Marcus, seemed like an odd formality at first. But after reading through it again, he could feel the faintest stirrings of curiosity. Heir to Marcus F. Carter's estate. The words were unsettling, like some echo from the past that didn't quite belong to him. It had been years since he'd even thought of his uncle, who had been a mysterious figure in his life, eccentric, distant, always wrapped in the fog of his strange pursuits. Jason knew little about Marcus's life other than the fact that he had run an antique shop that was supposedly filled with oddities from all over the universe. It wasn't that Jason didn't care, it was just that his uncle had been one of those people who preferred their own company, who kept their affairs private, and who vanished into the world with little explanation. And then, there was the letter, and his world turned upside down. Jason couldn't ignore it. He needed to find out what had happened, why his uncle had left him everything. As the flight to the small town where his uncle had lived took off, Jason stared out of the window at the distant horizon, his thoughts racing. The message in the letter had been brief: his uncle had passed away at the age of 72, and the estate, including all of Marcus's property and possessions, was now his. There were no details about how he had died, no mention of a funeral or a memorial service, just the plain and simple statement that everything Marcus owned, including his antique shop, was now Jason's responsibility. The oddest part was the reference to a hidden room behind Marcus's office that was a key part of the inheritance. Jason had no idea what that meant, but the letter had made it sound important, something about this room being a part of the shop that Marcus had never shared with anyone. Jason had no way of knowing whether it was just a strange artifact of his uncle's obsessive personality or if it was something more. Either way, it was clear that Marcus had left him something far more complex than the usual inheritance. When Jason arrived at the antique emporium, he was immediately struck by how unchanged the place seemed. The building stood on a narrow street in the heart of a small, rural town. From the outside, it looked exactly like the old shop he remembered visiting years ago: dusty windows, faded signs, and an old wooden door with peeling paint. There were no other signs of life, no customers or workers bustling around. Just a quiet building, standing almost as if it had been frozen in time. He wondered why Marcus had never made any attempt to modernize, to update the store, but he quickly dismissed the thought. It was his uncle's way of life, an eccentricity that Jason had never understood. Yet now, walking toward the door, he realized that it had never been just a simple antique shop. No, it had always been something more. The door creaked open as Jason stepped inside, greeted by the familiar smell of aged wood, mothballs, and something a little sharper, like metal or old machinery. His eyes scanned the room, filled with shelves and cabinets that seemed to house every imaginable object, some of it familiar, some of it so bizarre he had no idea what it was. There were old books, strange figurines, and seemingly random artifacts that looked like they had been pulled from different centuries or distant lands. The shelves were arranged haphazardly, as though there had been no real effort to organize the chaos. Jason felt as though he were stepping into a different world, a museum of forgotten things, a place where history was preserved not for study, but for preservation of something more personal. He wandered deeper into the shop, feeling the weight of the years pressing down on him as he walked past the towering piles of clutter. The shop had always been this way, a mishmash of artifacts from all over the world, from every corner of history. Jason couldn't help but wonder why his uncle had collected all these things, and why they were now his. What was the true meaning of this place, and why had Marcus left it all to him? His uncle had always been secretive, hiding away in his office, avoiding contact with others. Jason had never thought too much of it. After all, Marcus had never been one to share much about his life. But now, standing in the middle of the shop, Jason felt a strange sense of urgency and need to understand, to unlock whatever secrets his uncle had left behind. Jason made his way to the back of the store, where Marcus's office had always been located. It was a small room, tucked away behind a curtain of hanging tapestries and overflowing boxes. He had only been inside it a few times as a child, always feeling like an intruder. Now, it was his responsibility to explore it. As he approached the door, Jason's eyes fell on the faded sign that hung above it: Marcus F. Carter, Proprietor. The words, though faded, still seemed to hold an air of authority, a sense of permanence that the rest of the store lacked. He hesitated before turning the knob, unsure of what he would find on the other side. The door creaked open, revealing an office that looked frozen in time, just as he had imagined it. The desk was cluttered with papers, old books, and a series of curious gadgets. The walls were lined with more shelves, filled with strange objects, relics of a world Jason couldn't quite understand. It was as though his uncle had lived in this room, surrounded by the ghosts of history, untouched by the outside world. But it was the corner of the room that caught Jason's attention. There, almost hidden behind a set of shelves, was a faint outline on the wall, barely noticeable but unmistakable. He walked over to it, his heart beating faster with anticipation. With a gentle push, he revealed a small hidden latch embedded into the wall, just large enough for him to reach. His fingers trembled as he pulled it open, revealing a narrow passage that led downward into darkness. Jason's mind raced as he stood there, the weight of the moment settling over him. What was hidden here? What had his uncle been keeping secret? He didn't know what he expected, but a sense of inevitability gripped him as he took his first step down the darkened passage. The air grew cooler as he descended, and the narrow staircase led him deeper into the unknown. Jason's breath quickened as he reached the bottom, his heart pounding with anticipation. And then, in front of him, he saw it. A small room, illuminated by an eerie light that seemed to come from nowhere. The walls were covered in strange symbols, alien in their complexity, and in the center of the room was a pedestal. On that pedestal sat something that made Jason's heart race: a small, intricately carved box, glowing softly in the dim light. It wasn't just any box. It was special. His fingers shook as he approached it, and as soon as his hand touched the surface of the box, a shockwave of energy rippled through him. His mind flooded with images of distant worlds, strange creatures, and a powerful force that seemed to bind it all together. The box wasn't just an artifact. It was a key, a relic of something ancient and powerful. And Jason Carter, the most unlikely of heirs, had just become a part of something much larger than he could ever have imagined. Chapter 2. The Revelation. The box was cold to the touch, its surface smooth but oddly warm, as though it had been waiting for him to make contact. Jason's heart pounded as the world around him seemed to shift, the air growing heavier, more charged, as if the very atmosphere had transformed. The glow from the box intensified, casting strange shadows across the walls, and Jason could feel a subtle, rhythmic vibration emanating from the object in his hands. His mind raced with 1,000 questions, each more confusing than the last. What was this box? What was its significance, and why had his uncle hidden it away in this secret room? He had inherited an antique shop, yes, but he hadn't expected anything like this. This wasn't just an old relic, this was something far more important. Something alive. As the light from the box grew brighter, Jason took a deep breath and tried to steady his thoughts. He wasn't sure if he should be afraid or exhilarated, but something deep inside him urged him to trust the object, to listen to the silent call it seemed to be sending. The energy in the room was palpable now, like static electricity on the edge of his skin, and he could feel his muscles tense, his mind spinning with possibilities. He wasn't just holding an old artifact, he was holding the key to something much bigger, something beyond his understanding. The air crackled with anticipation, and Jason could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Whatever his uncle had hidden away here, it was about to change everything. There was no turning back now. The symbols on the walls began to shimmer, as though they were coming to life, their patterns shifting in intricate, flowing motions. Jason could hear a faint whisper, almost too quiet to catch, like a distant voice calling to him from the depths of the universe. He wasn't sure if it was his mind playing tricks on him, or if the box was somehow communicating with him, but he couldn't ignore it. With a slow, hesitant movement, he opened the box. Inside was an ancient, ornate key unlike any Jason had ever seen. It was large, made of a dark metal that shimmered with an unnatural glow. The shaft of the key was carved with more symbols, and at the end of it, a strange crystal seemed to pulse with a faint light. As soon as Jason touched the key, a sharp, electric jolt shot through his body, and the room around him seemed to explode in light. The world blurred, and for a moment, Jason felt as if he were falling through time itself, his senses overwhelmed by visions of other worlds, ancient civilizations, and far-off galaxies. The key in his hand was no mere object, it was a conduit, a link to something vast and ancient, a relic of an age long forgotten. And Jason Carter, unsuspecting and ordinary as he was, had just become the keeper of its power. He stumbled back, gasping for air as the visions faded, his surroundings returning to normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. He was no longer just a man in an antique shop. He was the custodian of a secret that had been hidden for centuries, and whatever lay ahead, Jason knew that his life would never be the same again. Jason staggered backward, his hand still holding the strange key as the echoes of the vision faded. The room around him felt different, quieter, yet charged with an intensity that was hard to explain. His head spun, and the weight of everything seemed to come crashing down on him all at once. The images from the vision, the ancient civilizations, the far-off galaxies, they were all still fresh in his mind, lingering in the corners of his consciousness like a dream he couldn't shake. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision, but the world felt a little less real, as though he was still tethered to something far beyond his understanding. The key in his hand pulsed with a soft light, the faint glow casting strange shadows on the walls. It seemed alive, resonating with something deeper, something ancient. Jason's heart raced in his chest, and his breath came in short, shallow bursts. He didn't know what he had just experienced or what it meant, but he knew that whatever this key was, it wasn't meant to be just a simple artifact. It was a doorway, one that had been locked away for centuries, and now, somehow, he had opened it. Slowly, Jason placed the key back inside the box, unsure of what to do next. The moment his fingers brushed against the key's cool surface, the vibrations in the air lessened, and the strange energy in the room seemed to calm. The symbols on the walls stopped shimmering, and the whispering voices faded into silence. The room, once filled with power, now felt oddly empty, as if it were waiting for him to make the next move. But what was the next move? Jason had no idea what he had just stumbled into. His uncle's shop, his inheritance, had suddenly transformed from an oddity into something far greater, something far more dangerous. The key was not just a simple relic, it was a bridge to something beyond his comprehension. He stood in the hidden room for what felt like an eternity, unsure of how to proceed. He had come here to settle his uncle's affairs, to take stock of what he had left behind. But now, he realized that he had found something far more significant than just antiques. This was a beginning, not an end, and it was a beginning that Jason was now a part of whether he was ready or not. Finally, he turned around and made his way back to the stairs, his heart still pounding in his chest. The door to the hidden room clicked softly behind him as he emerged back into the dim light of the shop. The sounds of the outside world seemed distant, muffled by the weight of what he had just uncovered. Jason felt an almost unbearable sense of isolation, as if the whole world had fallen away and left him standing alone in a vast, dark expanse. As he walked back toward the shop's main area, the weight of the inheritance hit him harder than ever. His uncle had left him a legacy, but it wasn't a legacy of old furniture or knickknacks. It was something much darker, much deeper. Jason's fingers gripped the box in his hands, and a thought gnawed at him. What did Marcus know? What had he been involved in? His uncle had never been open with him about his past, and now, it seemed that Jason had inherited more than just a shop. He had inherited a mystery. As Jason approached the front door, ready to step out of the shop and leave the weight of it all behind for a moment, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. There, nestled between the piles of old trinkets on a dusty shelf, was a small, weathered book. It wasn't much, just a simple leather-bound journal, its edges frayed and worn from age. But something about it called to him, a pull he couldn't ignore. The book looked ancient, its pages yellowed with age, and it had an aura of secrecy about it that reminded him of the key. His breath hitched as he reached for it, his fingers brushing the soft, cracked leather. The moment he touched the journal, the air seemed to shift again, the faint hum of energy filling the space around him. It was as though the journal had been waiting for him, beckoning him to uncover its contents. Without a second thought, Jason opened the book, and as the first page turned beneath his fingers, the truth began to unfold. Chapter 3: The Secrets Unveiled. The journal was a hodgepodge of Marcus's thoughts, notes, and observations, written in a hasty, almost frantic hand. The first few pages were filled with mundane accounts of life at the antique emporium business, customers, and the odd purchases Marcus had made, but as Jason flipped through the pages, the tone began to shift. The writing became more erratic, more personal, and soon Jason was reading entries that spoke of strange visions, cryptic dreams, and encounters with beings and forces beyond the scope of human understanding. "The key is the key," one entry began, written in an almost feverish scrawl. "Marcus, you must guard it with your life. It is not just an object, it is the door to something greater. They will come for it. They will come for you, too, but you mustn't let them take it. It's not just the past they want, it's the future. Do not let them open the door." Jason felt his stomach churn as he read the words, his mind reeling. What had his uncle been involved in? What had he known about this key, about the power it held, that Jason hadn't yet begun to comprehend? The journal detailed strange meetings with unknown individuals, cryptic messages that made little sense, and mentions of an ancient organization that seemed to operate in the shadows, pulling strings across the galaxy. There were references to guardians and the balance, phrases that seemed to carry a weight Jason couldn't quite grasp. As he read further, Jason began to understand that his uncle's life had been more than just a collection of oddities and strange objects. It had been a life steeped in secrecy, in something much larger than a small-town antique shop. Marcus had been part of something that had spanned centuries, something that transcended even his own understanding, and Jason had inherited a piece of it. The journal detailed a final entry, written in shaky handwriting, as though Marcus had been nearing the end of his life and knew it. "I am not safe. They are coming for me. They want the key, and I cannot stop them. I have hidden the door, but Jason. Jason is the last hope. The legacy of the Guardians is now his. He must carry it, for if he does not, the balance will be lost, and everything will fall into darkness. The key, it must not be lost." Jason closed the book slowly, his hands trembling as the weight of his uncle's words settled heavily on him. Marcus had known. He had known that Jason would be the one to inherit this mystery, and now Jason was left holding the key, the box, and the journal, his life forever changed. He wasn't just a man who had inherited an antique shop, he was a keeper of something far more dangerous, far more powerful. His uncle had left him with a responsibility that stretched beyond Earth, beyond the confines of this little shop. And now, Jason realized, the story wasn't just about him. It was about something much larger. The journal had shown him that he was connected to something ancient, something that had been guarded for centuries, and that he was now part of a legacy that would determine the future of the universe. Jason's mind raced as he stood in the shop, the quiet weight of the journal in his hands. He was no longer just a man with a simple inheritance. He was now a part of something vast and complex, a guardian of the balance between forces he didn't fully understand. And as the shadows of his uncle's legacy began to envelop him, Jason knew that his life would never be the same again. Jason leaned against the dusty shelves, the journal still held tightly in his hands, as the weight of Marcus's words settled in his chest. The more he read, the more the reality of the situation became clear. His life had irrevocably changed. He wasn't just dealing with a quirky inheritance or a strange antique shop. He was now involved in something much larger, something ancient and far beyond his understanding. He ran his fingers along the pages of the journal, feeling the smooth texture of the worn paper. Every word seemed to echo in his mind, every sentence carrying a sense of foreboding, a warning that Jason couldn't ignore. The key, the box, the hidden room, all of it was more than just physical objects. They were part of a puzzle, a dangerous legacy that his uncle had left him. The guardians, the balance, the key to something unknown, it all pointed to a larger force, one that Jason was now part of. But what did all of this mean? How was he supposed to carry out his uncle's legacy when he didn't even know who or what he was dealing with? He had always been a man of reason, of logic, and now he found himself in a world where neither seemed to apply. The box had shown him visions, strange and cryptic glimpses of other worlds and ancient civilizations. And while Jason tried to shake off the feeling of unease, he knew deep down that something had awakened within him. He couldn't simply walk away from this. His uncle had trusted him, and now it was up to Jason to unravel the mystery and, somehow, protect whatever Marcus had hidden. Jason closed the journal, his mind spinning with possibilities. But before he could gather his thoughts, a soft sound echoed through the shop. He froze, his heart skipping a beat. Was it just the creaking of the old building, or was there someone else here? He had locked the door when he arrived, and there had been no sign of anyone else in the store. But the sound persisted, a soft rustling followed by a quiet scraping noise. Jason's instincts kicked in, and he moved quickly toward the source of the noise, toward the back of the shop, near the entrance to the hidden room. As he approached, he caught sight of movement, something or someone emerging from the shadows. Jason's breath hitched as he stepped forward, and his eyes widened at the sight before him. Standing in the doorway to the hidden room was a figure, cloaked in dark fabric, their face obscured by a hood. They didn't seem surprised to see him, nor did they show any sign of hostility. Instead, the figure simply stood there, watching him intently. "Who are you?" Jason asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, they stepped forward slowly, the soft scraping noise now clear as the sound of boots dragging against the worn floor. Jason instinctively took a step back, his mind racing for an explanation. Was this person a thief? An intruder? Or something more sinister? "You've found it." The figure finally spoke, their voice low and gravelly. "You've found the key." Jason's heart skipped a beat. How did they know about the key? Did they know what it meant, what it was capable of? He held the journal tighter, as if it were some kind of shield, but the figure seemed unfazed. "Who are you?" Jason repeated, his voice more forceful this time. He had no idea what was going on, but he wasn't about to stand idly by. Whoever this person was, they were too calm, too knowing, and Jason needed answers. The figure slowly lifted their hood, revealing a face that, though human, held an air of strange familiarity. The eyes were piercing, dark and intense, but there was something unnervingly ageless about the person before him, something that suggested they were far older than they appeared. "I'm someone who has been watching over the key," the figure said cryptically, their voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I've been waiting for someone to take up the mantle, to understand what it means. To protect it." Jason's confusion deepened. Protect it from what? The figure's lips curved into a faint smile, but it wasn't reassuring. From those who would use it to unravel the fabric of existence itself. The key is not just a relic, it is a weapon, a power beyond comprehension. It opens doors to worlds, to realms that can reshape reality. And you, Jason Carter, are the one who must decide if the key is used for salvation or destruction. Jason could feel the air around him growing heavier, and his mind raced. He had only touched the key moments ago. He had no idea what it meant, what power it held. But now, standing in front of this mysterious figure, Jason realized just how far this tangled web of fate went. "What do you want with the key?" Jason demanded. "Why are you here?" The figure took a step closer, their presence almost suffocating in its intensity. "I'm here because your uncle understood the importance of the key. He knew that his time was limited, and that's why he left it to you. But now, it's up to you to decide what happens next." Jason was still processing everything, but one thing became clear. This wasn't just about a shop. It wasn't just about a strange inheritance. This was about the very balance of the universe, and somehow, Jason had been pulled into the center of it all. "Who are you?" Jason asked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm an agent of the balance. I've been entrusted with watching over the key, ensuring that it does not fall into the wrong hands. But I am not the only one watching." Jason's heart raced as the implications of the figure's words sunk in. "So, there are others who want the key?" The figure nodded. "Yes, and they will stop at nothing to take it from you." Jason's mind raced. The key, the box, the symbols, it was all starting to make sense, but only just. He wasn't prepared for this kind of responsibility, for the dangers that seemed to loom on the horizon. But one thing was certain now. Whatever his uncle had left him, whatever path he was being forced onto, there was no turning back. Chapter 4. The Final Decision. The figure's presence loomed over Jason, their words heavy with meaning. The weight of everything that had happened to inheritance, the strange symbols, the key finally began to settle fully on Jason's shoulders. He had thought of himself as just an ordinary man, but now he realized that his life had taken an extraordinary turn, one that he couldn't ignore. His uncle's antique shop had been a front, a place to hide away the power of the key, and Jason was now its unwilling guardian. The figure's eyes remained fixed on him, their expression unreadable. "You must understand, Jason. The key is not just a thing to be used. It is a tool, a doorway. There are those who would use it to reshape reality, to alter time itself. It is not something that can be handled lightly." Jason's mind swirled. He had no idea how he was supposed to handle such responsibility. He was just a man who liked his simple life, his quiet days spent at the office, keeping to himself. But now, he was standing in the midst of an ancient power, one that threatened everything. He looked down at the key, still nestled in the box in his hands, glowing softly in the dim light of the shop. It was as if it were waiting for him, waiting for the next step. Jason could feel its pull, its subtle call, but he didn't know if he was ready for what lay ahead. "How do I stop them?" Jason finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder, their touch surprisingly gentle. "You will not stop them alone, Jason. The key has chosen you, but it also needs others. You cannot protect it by yourself. You must find the guardians, those who still know the truth of the key, who can help you protect the balance. Only then will you be able to stand against those who would destroy everything." Jason's heart raced. Guardians? Others? He didn't even know where to begin, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't do this alone. The weight of the task ahead of him felt insurmountable, but there was no choice. His uncle's legacy had become his own, and now he had to fight to protect it. As the figure turned and began to leave, Jason looked back one last time at the shop. It had once been just a building, a curiosity, but now it was a gateway to something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but Jason Carter wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. With a final glance at the glowing key, Jason stepped out of the antique emporium and into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. The balance of the universe depended on it.